The cargo bay doors opened with a hiss that echoed through the metal chamber. Peter Walsh stood in the center of the room, hands bound behind his back, while representatives from 12 different species watched from behind reinforced glass. None of them looked happy. Most looked like they were attending a funeral. Ambassador Quillen, a bird-like creature with pale blue feathers, pressed one wing against the observation window. Her translator crackled to life. "This is murder. We all know it." Director Harmon, who had 4 arms and skin like gray rubber, tapped his fingers against his desk in a nervous rhythm. The council voted. He broke the most sacred rule. He tried to communicate with prohibited creatures. Peter almost laughed. Tried to communicate, as if talking to animals was a crime. Back on Earth, he had spent 20 years in the Amazon rainforest, learning from indigenous trackers, watching jaguars hunt, understanding how predators thought. When humanity joined the galactic community, he became a xenobiologist, excited to study new forms of life. That excitement died 3 months ago when he suggested that the creatures on Dagran 7 might be intelligent. The council called them monsters. Nightmares. Demons in flesh. Every expedition to Dagran 7 ended in blood and screams. 72 hours was the longest any team survived. The collective decided the planet was cursed, useful only as a dumping ground for criminals they wanted to disappear quietly. Peter Walsh, Director Harmon's voice boomed through the speakers. "You are sentenced to survival exile on Dagran 7. May your death be swift." Peter looked up at the observation deck. "I'll send you a postcard." Several aliens gasped. Humans were strange, they all agreed, but joking about death was disturbing even by human standards. They assumed it was shock, a broken mind trying to cope with inevitable doom. .2 security guards, both from the insect-like crick species, grabbed Peter's arms and led him to the drop pod. The small capsule would carry him through the atmosphere and crash him into the jungle below. They gave him a survival pack, 1 knife, a fire starter, a water filter, and an emergency beacon. "The beacon won't work," one guard clicked through his translator. "Atmosphere too thick. Electromagnetic interference." "Noted," Peter said. They stripped away his bound hands and shoved him into the pod. The door sealed with a heavy clunk. Through the small window, Peter saw Ambassador Quillen with her wing over her face, unable to watch. Director Harmon looked ill. Even the guards seemed uncomfortable. The pod launched. Peter's stomach dropped as the capsule shot away from the station, spinning toward the planet below. Through the window, Dagran 7 grew larger, a world of dark green and purple vegetation, covered in storm clouds that crackled with constant lightning. The gravity was twice Earth's standard. The atmosphere was thick with moisture. The largest predators weighed over 4 tons and hunted in packs. Paradise, Peter thought, if you knew what you were doing. The pod hit the atmosphere hard. Everything shook. Peter gritted his teeth as the heat shields glowed orange, then red, then white. The capsule screamed through the air, falling like a meteor toward the jungle canopy below. Impact came sudden and violent. The pod smashed through tree branches, each one thick as earth oak trunks. Peter's harness dug into his chest as the capsule bounced, tumbled, and finally wedged itself between 2 massive trees, hanging 20 feet above the forest floor. For a moment, everything was silent except for the creaking of stressed metal and the drip of moisture. Peter took a breath, checked himself for injuries, found only bruises. He hit the release on his harness and grabbed his survival pack. The pod door was jammed. Peter kicked it once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th kick, it flew open, and he tumbled out, grabbing a branch to stop his fall. He hung there for a moment, feet dangling, then climbed down carefully. The jungle was darker than he expected. The canopy above blocked most light, creating a twilight world of shadows and strange sounds. The air was thick, humid, hard to breathe. Every surface dripped with water. The gravity pulled at him, making each movement require more effort. Peter set down his pack and took stock. The trees were enormous, covered in moss that glowed faintly purple. Strange insects buzzed past, some as large as his hand. In the distance, something howled, a sound that started low and rose to a shriek that made his bones vibrate. He pulled out his knife and began cutting vines, testing which ones were strong enough to hold weight. Within an hour, he had created a basic rope and secured his pack. He found a cluster of rocks that formed a small shelter, just large enough to crawl inside. As darkness fell, the jungle came alive. Sounds erupted from every direction. Clicks, whistles, roars, screams. Peter sat in his shelter, back against stone, knife in hand. He pulled out a small waterproof journal from his pack and began writing by the light of bioluminescent moss. Day 1. Landed safely. Gravity is challenging but manageable. Local flora shows signs of complex ecosystem. Fauna sounds aggressive but follows patterns. Hunting calls happen in sequence, suggesting coordination and intelligence. That a massive roar shook the jungle. Something huge was moving through the trees, snapping branches that would take 3 men to break. The sound came closer. Peter could feel vibrations through the ground, rhythmic and heavy. Footsteps. He set down his journal and listened. The creature was circling his position, staying just out of sight. Peter remained perfectly still, breathing slowly. After 10 minutes, the footsteps moved away. Peter picked up his journal again and added one more line. First contact protocols initiated. Let's see if they're willing to talk. He closed the journal, wrapped himself in his thin survival blanket, and tried to sleep despite the screaming jungle around him. 3 weeks on Darren, 7 had taught Peter Walsh that patience was the difference between dying and thriving. Right now, he needed every ounce of that patience because a creature the size of a cargo truck was sniffing the air 6 feet away from where he sat. The animal had 6 legs, each ending in claws that could shred steel. Its body was covered in dark scales that reflected light like broken glass. 2 rows of crystalline fangs lined its jaw, each one longer than Peter's hand. The eyes were strange, milky white with no visible pupil. Blind, Peter had realized days ago. The creatures hunted by sensing electrical fields and ground vibrations. Peter sat absolutely motionless on a flat rock, breathing slowly through his nose. He had learned to control his heartbeat through meditation techniques taught by an old tracker in Brazil. Slow and steady. No sudden spikes of adrenaline. Nothing that would register as prey behavior. The creature, which Peter mentally called a prism tooth because of those crystalline fangs, tilted its massive head. Its nostrils flared. It took one step closer than another. Peter could smell it now, a mix of wet earth and something metallic. The prism tooth opened its jaws slightly, tasting the air. Then it did something Peter had hoped for, but not expected. It sat down, haunches folding under its weight, and simply observed. Not aggressive, just curious. Peter waited 5 more minutes before moving. When he did, it was just his hand reaching slowly to the leather pouch at his belt. The prism tooth's head tracked the movement but didn't react. Peter pulled out a chunk of dried meat from a herbivore he had hunted 2 days ago. He set the meat on the rock between them and withdrew his hand. The prism tooth stood, approached cautiously, and sniffed the offering. Its tongue, which was surprisingly narrow and precise, licked the meat once. Then it ate, picking up the chunk with surprising delicacy for such a massive creature. Peter allowed himself a small smile. Progress. Over the past 3 weeks, he had learned more about Darren, 7 than all previous expeditions combined, mostly because those expeditions had focused on defending themselves rather than understanding. Peter took the opposite approach. He watched. He learned. He adapted. The prism tooths were the apex predators of this region, but they weren't mindless killers. They had territories marked by claw marks on specific trees. They hunted in coordinated packs, which meant communication and planning. They cared for their young, which meant emotional bonds. Most importantly, they didn't waste energy on threats that didn't challenge them. Previous expeditions had set up camps with bright lights, loud generators, and electronic equipment that screamed electromagnetic signatures across the jungle. Then they wondered why every predator in 10 miles came to investigate. They had essentially rung a dinner bell and acted surprised when guests arrived that Peter's camp was different. He found a cave system in a cliff face, naturally defensible and already marked with old territorial signs. Instead of claiming it, he had spent a week leaving offerings at the entrance. Small amounts of food, signs of respect. Eventually, the resident prism-tooth pack accepted his presence. The creature in front of him finished the meat and looked at Peter with those strange milky eyes. It made a sound, low and rumbling, that Peter felt in his chest more than heard. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the jungle shadows. Peter let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He pulled out his journal and began writing. Day 22. Successful non-aggressive contact with adult prism tooth. Female, approximately 8 feet at shoulder, scarred flank from recent territorial dispute. Accepted food, offering, and showed curiosity rather than aggression. The previous expedition reports were wrong. These creatures aren't mindless killers. They're intelligent, territorial, and social. We just needed to approach them correctly. Over the following days, the scarred female returned. Peter continued leaving offerings, never approaching, always showing respect. He watched her hunt, observed how she communicated with others through low-frequency sounds and subtle body positioning. She had a pack, a larger male, 3 half-grown cubs, and another adult female. Peter named her Scar, simple and descriptive. The large male became bolder because of his massive, rock-like build. The cubs were just the cubs, playful and curious in the way young predators are across every species. One afternoon, Scar returned to the cave entrance limping badly. Peter watched from inside as she collapsed near the water source he had diverted to flow past the entrance. Her injured leg was swollen, with deep claw marks that oozed a dark fluid. Infected, Peter made a decision that could kill him. He gathered supplies. Moss that he had discovered had antiseptic properties, clean water, and strips of plant fiber. He approached Scar slowly, humming a low tune to announce his presence without startling her. Scar raised her head, watching. Her body tensed, ready to strike if needed. Peter knelt 10 feet away and set down his supplies. He waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Scar's breathing was labored, the infection clearly spreading. Peter moved closer, 1 foot at a time, still humming. When he reached her, he knelt beside the wounded leg and began cleaning the injury. Scar's muscles bunched under her scales. One wrong move, and she could kill him in half a second. But Peter worked steadily, washing the wound, applying the moss, wrapping it with fiber. He talked while he worked, keeping his voice calm and steady. "There we go. I know it hurts, but this will help. You're going to be fine. I've got you." When he finished, Peter backed away slowly. Scar watched him go, then lowered her head to sniff the bandage. She looked at Peter with what he could only describe as understanding. 3 days later, Scar brought him a kill. A freshly hunted herbivore, still warm, laid carefully at the cave entrance. Peter stared at it, then at Scar, who sat nearby watching pack behavior. She was sharing food. She had accepted him. Peter laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed through the jungle. He wasn't just surviving Daegran 7. He was becoming part of it. Rain hammered down on the jungle canopy, but inside the cave, Peter Walsh was warm, dry, and currently teaching a 4-ton predator how to play fetch. The absurdity wasn't lost on him. 2 months had passed since his exile. The emergency beacon sat in a tree outside, blinking its useless red light every 6 seconds. Peter had turned it into a clock of sorts, counting days by how many times it blinked. Today marked day 63.1 of Scar's cubs, the smallest and most curious, dropped a round stone at Peter's feet and made an expectant chirping sound. Peter picked up the stone and threw it across the cave. The cub bounded after it, skidding on the smooth floor, then returned triumphantly with the stone in its jaws. Boulder, the massive alpha male, watched from the cave entrance with what Peter interpreted as patient disapproval. The other 2 cubs wrestled near the back of the cave, their play fighting surprisingly gentle given their size and strength. Scar lay nearby, her injured leg fully healed, grooming her flank. She had become Peter's closest companion, often sleeping near him at night. The pack had fully accepted his presence. More than that, they protected him. When a rival pack tried to enter the territory last week, Boulder and Scar had driven them off while the cubs stayed with Peter, forming a defensive circle around him. Peter's life had settled into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything he had known in civilized space. Wake at dawn. Check the water source. Hunt with the pack or gather from the jungle. Document everything. Cook whatever he found. Sleep surrounded by creatures that could tear him apart, but chose instead to keep him warm. The cooking had become important. Peter discovered that Darren 7 was a treasure trove of ingredients. Fungi that tasted like butter, tubers that were naturally sweet, herbs that added flavors he couldn't name. He had begun keeping detailed notes in a separate journal, creating recipes that worked with his limited tools and the fire pit he maintained. Today's meal was roasted herbivore meat seasoned with crushed purple moss and wrapped in broadleaves. The pack ate raw, of course, but Peter noticed they seemed curious about the smells coming from his cooking fire. Scar often sat nearby when he cooked, nostrils flaring that a shadow passed over the cave entrance. Peter looked up to see Wing circling overhead. The Sky Reaper was his most recent friend, a flying predator with a wingspan of 20 feet and talons that could punch through tree trunks. Peter had found her 3 weeks ago with a broken wing, tangled in vines and slowly dying. He spent 2 days carefully splinting the wing and feeding her until she was strong enough to fly again. Now she returned daily, sometimes bringing fish from the rivers, sometimes just landing nearby to preen. The Prism Tooths had been wary at first, but they accepted Wing as part of the strange pack that included a human. Peter walked to the cave entrance and raised his arm. Wing swooped down and landed on a reinforced branch he had positioned for exactly this purpose. Her weight would have broken his arm. She clicked her beak at him, a greeting sound he had learned meant contentment. "Good hunting?" he asked. Wing dropped a large fish at his feet and clicked again. "Thank you. I'll cook this for dinner." Life on Darren 7 had become something Peter never expected. Not survival, but home. He talked to the creatures constantly, narrating his actions, sharing his thoughts. They didn't understand his words, but they understood his tone, his intent. Communication went deeper than language. The smallest cub dropped the stone at his feet again. Peter threw it, watched the cub chase it, and smiled. He thought about his grandmother, who raised him after his parents died. She used to say that food was how you made family. You shared meals, you shared life, you shared love. Peter understood that now in ways he never had before. As evening fell, Peter sat by his fire and opened his main journal. It was nearly full, pages packed with observations about behavior, ecology, communication patterns. He had documented 17 different species of apex predators, mapped their territories, recorded their calls. This information alone would revolutionize xenobiology, but more than that, he had proven something the collective refused to believe. Death worlds weren't death sentences. They were complex ecosystems that required respect and understanding. The creatures here weren't monsters. They were intelligent beings trying to survive, just like everyone else. Peter was writing notes about seasonal migration patterns when the beacon suddenly stopped blinking. He looked up, confused. Then it blinked again, but different, faster, brighter. The pattern had changed. His heart sank. The atmospheric interference had cleared. Seasonal weather patterns, he realized. The beacon was transmitting with full power. Scar sensed his distress immediately. She moved to his side, pressing her massive body against him in comfort. The cub stopped playing and watched. Boulder stood, alert, scanning for threats. Peter stood and walked outside. The beacon blinked its message into space, a signal that would reach the nearest collective station within hours. A rescue would come. They would find him alive, healthy, thriving. They would also find 5 Prism Tooths and a Sky Reaper. For a moment, Peter considered destroying the beacon. He could stay here, live out his life with his pack. But that felt selfish. What he had learned could change everything. These creatures, this world, deserved more than to be classified as a death zone. Peter made his decision. He would go back, but not alone. The pack would come with him. All of them. He would show the collective what they had been too afraid to see. He looked at Scar, who tilted her head in question. "We're going on a trip," he said. "Come meet new people. Don't worry. I'll make sure they understand your family." Scar rumbled. a sound that meant trust. Peter scratched behind her jaw where she liked it and began planning the impossible. He had 48 hours before rescue arrived. 48 hours to prepare apex predators for space travel. 48 hours to change the galaxy's understanding of death worlds. Peter Walsh had survived 3 months alone on the most dangerous planet in known space. Teaching his pack to behave on a spaceship would be easy in comparison. Probably. Peter Walsh had 48 hours to accomplish the impossible, and he started by banging 2 rocks together as loud as he could. The cubs jumped. Scar's ears flattened. Boulder growled low in his throat. Wing screeched from her perch and mantled her wings defensively. Perfect. That was exactly the reaction he needed to eliminate. Easy, Peter said, keeping his voice calm. He banged the rocks again. The pack tensed, but didn't flee. He did a 3rd time, 4th, 5th. After 20 repetitions, Scar stopped flinching. After 50, the cubs barely reacted. Boulder still looked annoyed, but that was his default expression. Hour one of preparation complete. The pack was learning that loud noises didn't mean danger. Peter had a plan broken into stages. First, desensitization to noise and light. Second, comfort with confined spaces. Third, following complex commands reliably. Fourth, demonstrating intelligence to observers. He had 2 days to compress months of training into crash course basics. The sun climbed higher. Peter lit a signal flare he had saved from his survival pack. The bright red flame and acrid smoke filled the cave entrance. Wings shrieked and took flight. The cubs scattered to the back of the cave. Scar moved between Peter and the flare, protective. "It's okay," Peter said. He walked calmly to the flare and stood next to it, showing no fear. Scar watched, confused but trusting. Peter gestured for her to come closer. She approached carefully, sniffed the smoke, sneezed, but stayed near him. The cubs watched their mother. If Scar wasn't afraid, they wouldn't be either. Within 20 minutes, all 3 cubs were investigating the flare with curious chirps. Boulder maintained his position at the entrance, stubborn as always, but Peter noticed his shoulders had relaxed. Wing took longer. She circled overhead for an hour before finally landing, though she kept her distance from the flare until it burned out. Stage 1 complete. Stage 2 would be harder. Peter had been leading the pack in and out of the cave for weeks, but always with the entrance wide open and plenty of space. Now he needed them comfortable with tighter quarters. He spent the afternoon constructing a narrow passage using fallen logs and vines, creating a tunnel just wide enough for Boulder to squeeze through. The cubs went first, treating it like a game. They bounded through the tunnel, turned around, came back. Easy. Scar followed with more dignity, but no hesitation. Boulder refused outright. The big male sat down and stared at Peter with what looked like disapproval. "Come on," Peter encouraged. He walked through the tunnel himself to demonstrate. Boulder didn't budge. Peter tried food rewards, placing chunks of fresh meat at the far end. Boulder huffed, but didn't move. An hour passed. Peter sat down to think of a new approach when he heard movement. Boulder was testing the tunnel, one massive paw reaching inside. Then another. The big predator moved slowly, carefully, his bulk barely fitting. When Boulder emerged on the other side, Peter whooped with joy and tossed him an entire haunch of meat. Boulder caught it, looked somewhat pleased with himself, and ate while the cub climbed on his back. Stage 2 complete. Now, for the hardest part, Peter had been teaching basic commands for weeks, but they needed polish. He spent the evening drilling the pack on 4 essential commands. Stay meant freeze in position. Come meant approach him. Gentle meant move slowly and carefully. Friend meant a new person or creature was not a threat. The cubs learned fastest. Young minds adapted easily. Scar understood the commands, but sometimes chose to ignore them, which Peter found amusing but impractical for the current situation. Boulder followed commands only from Peter, refusing to acknowledge hand signals from anyone else, which would be a problem if Peter needed someone else to help control the pack. That be why midnight, Peter had drilled the commands hundreds of times. His voice was hoarse. The pack was tired, but they were responding with 90% reliability, which would have to be good enough. Day 2 began before dawn. Peter had spent the night preparing food, cooking dishes from his best recipes. Roasted meat with herb crust, tubers glazed with reduced fruit juice, fungi sautéed with wild garlic, smoked fish wrapped in edible leaves. Everything packed carefully in containers made from hollowed gourds and sealed with wax from native insects. This was his evidence that Darren, 7, wasn't worthless. This was his proof that death worlds could be resources instead of graveyards, that he also prepared documentation. Every journal he had filled, organized by topic. Behavioral observations, ecological mapping, communication patterns, recipes, medical notes on the antiseptic moss and other useful plants, sketches of every creature he had encountered. This was his life's work condensed into 3 months of focused study. The final piece of preparation was the hardest. Peter needed to show that the pack wasn't just trained but intelligent. He spent the afternoon setting up a demonstration. He arranged rocks into a maze pattern with pieces of meat hidden at various points. The cubs had to work together, moving rocks to create paths, communicating to avoid dead ends. The first attempt was chaos. The cubs scattered, Boulder watched with bored indifference, and Scar simply walked over the rocks to get the meat directly. Peter tried again, this time with Peter himself in the maze. He pretended to be stuck, calling for help. Scar understood immediately. She began moving rocks, creating a path. The cubs saw what their mother was doing and joined in. Even Boulder participated, using his massive strength to shift the largest obstacles. When Peter emerged from the maze, the pack circled him protectively, checking that he was unharmed. It was perfect. It showed problem-solving, cooperation, and care for a pack member. Peter heard the communication from Ambassador Quillen crackle through the beacon's receiver. Dr. Walsh, remain at your location. We're sending an armed team. Do not approach the creatures. We'll extract you safely. Peter picked up the communicator and smiled. Change of plans, Ambassador. You're going to want to bring a bigger ship. And prepare your cafeteria. I'm coming home with guests, and they're going to want feeding. There was a long silence. Then Ambassador Quillen's voice, shaking slightly. Peter, what have you done? Something wonderful, Peter replied. You'll see. The rescue ship landed with enough noise and fire to wake everything within 5 miles. Trees bent from the engine wash. Birds scattered into the sky. The ground shook with the impact of landing struts. It was exactly the kind of entrance that would normally trigger every predator instinct on Darren. 7. Peter gave the command. Stay. 5 prism tooths and 1 sky reaper remained perfectly still. Scar sat at Peter's right side. Boulder at his left. The cubs formed a line behind them. Wing perched on a reinforced branch overhead. Wings folded, calm as could be. They looked like a formal greeting party. The ship's doors opened with a hiss of pressurized air. 4 10th security officers stepped out first, each one wearing full combat armor with mounted weapons. Their 4 arms carried rifles that could punch through concrete. They took one look at the scene, and every weapon raised simultaneously. Behind them came Ambassador Quillen in a floating medical pod, armored and shielded. Her feathers were puffed with stress. Her translator was already crackling warnings. Step away from the creatures, Dr. Walsh. Do it slowly. We have medical sedatives ready. Peter didn't move. Put the weapons down, Ambassador. These are my colleagues. I'd rather not start with threats. You've gone insane, one security officer stated flatly. That's the only explanation. Isolation psychosis. I assure you, my mind is fine. Better than fine, actually. I've had excellent company. Peter gestured to the pack without looking away from the armed team. They won't hurt you unless you give them reason, which pointing weapons at their pack member definitely qualifies as. Boulder growled, a sound that started deep in his chest and vibrated through the ground. The security team took a step back despite their armor. Ambassador Quillen's medical pod floated forward. Peter, please. The council ordered us to extract you. Just you. The creatures must remain here. Then I remain here too. Peter crossed his arms. But I have a better idea. Let me show you what 3 months of proper research can accomplish. Give me 10 minutes. If you're not impressed, I'll discuss leaving. Deal. The security chief, a grizzled Tinthu named Roberts, looked at Ambassador Quillen. She considered for a long moment, then nodded. 10 minutes. But if any of those things move aggressively, we fire. Understood. Peter turned to his pack. Ready. He raised his hand. Stay. All 6 creatures remained motionless. He walked 20 feet away from them, turned, raised both hands. Cool, mate. The pack moved as one unit, flowing forward with coordinated grace. They stopped exactly where Peter stood, forming a semicircle around him. The cubs sat in perfect symmetry. Scar and Boulder flanked him like honor guards. Wing glided down and landed on her branch, now carried forward by the smallest cub who had learned to balance it. The security team looked stunned. Formation, Peter said next. The pack shifted, creating a straight line with Peter at the center. Each creature sat at attention, waiting. Ambassador Quillen's translator made a sound like a gasp. Peter walked to Scar. Gentle. He opened her jaws with his bare hands, showing rows of crystalline teeth that could bite through steel. She remained perfectly still, breathing calmly. He reached inside and touched one fang, then withdrew his hand and closed her jaws. Scar's tail swished once. Content, he repeated the demonstration with Boulder, whose jaws were even larger. The big male allowed Peter complete access, even closing his eyes in trust. The cubs came next. Peter had them solve the rock maze puzzle while the security team watched. The cubs worked together, moving obstacles, creating paths, showing clear problem-solving skills and communication. When they finished, Peter rewarded them with treats from his pack. They're not mindless killers, Peter explained. They're intelligent pack hunters with complex social structures. Previous expeditions failed because they approached with fear and aggression. I approached with respect and patience. Roberts, the security chief, lowered his rifle slightly. How was this possible? Because I didn't try to conquer them. I tried to understand them. Peter gestured for Roberts to approach. The Tenthu hesitated, then took 3 careful steps forward. Boulder, Peter said. Friend. He gestured to Roberts. Boulder stood, walked slowly to Roberts, and sat down in front of him. The Tenthu froze. Boulder was massive up close, his shoulder level with Robert's chest, even sitting. The predator opened his jaws slightly, showing his teeth, then closed them and lowered his head. He's offering trust, Peter said. You can touch his flank if you want. He won't hurt you. Roberts, to his credit, reached out with one shaking arm and placed a hand on Boulder's scales. Nothing happened. Boulder rumbled, a sound of acceptance. Robert's other 3 arms slowly relaxed. This is impossible, Roberts whispered. We lost 17 people studying these creatures. You were studying them wrong, Peter said. He pulled out his basket of prepared food. But that's not all Darren 7 has to offer. The council called this planet worthless. A graveyard. I've been eating better here than I did on the station. He unpacked his containers. Roasted meat with herbs. Glazed tubers. Smoked fish. Sautéed fungi. The smells drifted across the clearing. Ambassador Quillen's medical pod opened slightly, so she could see better. This is all from Darren 7, she asked. Everything. I have 3 journals full of recipes. Nutritional analysis shows these foods have compounds we've never seen. Medical properties. Unique flavors. This planet isn't a graveyard. It's a garden. We just needed to learn how to live in it. Peter offered samples to the team. Roberts tried the roasted meat first, cautiously. His expression changed from suspicion to surprise to delight. This is incredible, he admitted. Ambassador Quillen tasted next. She made a sound through her translator that didn't translate, but clearly meant pleasure. Even the other security officers tried samples. Weapons finally lowered. Peter's communicator crackled. Director Harmon's voice came through, angry and scared. This is the collective council. Terminate those creatures immediately. Dr. Walsh, you're being detained for creating a diplomatic incident. Peter looked at Ambassador Quillen. Or, you could let me present my findings to the council. Give these creatures a chance to show their value. If the council rejects it, I'll return to Darren 7 voluntarily. Ambassador Quillen looked at the pack, at the food, at Peter standing confidently among creatures that should have killed him. She made a decision that would change everything. Director, this is Ambassador Quillen. I'm using my authority to grant Dr. Walsh a formal hearing. Prepare the Grand Assembly. They need to see this. The Grand Assembly Hall of Station Unity had hosted countless important meetings over the centuries, but never one quite like this. 40 species sent representatives. Security lined every wall. News feeds from a dozen worlds broadcast live. At the center platform stood Peter Walsh, wearing clean clothes for the first time in months, with Scar and Boulder standing calmly beside him in specially designed harnesses. Above them, Wing perched on a reinforced beam that engineers had installed overnight. The Cubs waited in an observation room with Roberts and his security team, who had spent the past week bonding with the young predators and now refused to let anyone else guard them. Director Harmon stood at the council podium, his forearms gesturing dramatically. This human has violated every protocol we have. He was sentenced to exile for good reason. He endangered this station by bringing prohibited creatures aboard. He has created a diplomatic crisis that threatens our entire scientific framework. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Several representatives looked terrified of the prism tooths, despite the fact that Scar was currently yawning peacefully. A move for immediate termination of the creatures and permanent detention of Peter Walsh, Harmon concluded. Ambassador Quillen stood. A move for a full hearing of Dr. Walsh's findings before any decisions are made. Scientific evidence should be reviewed. The vote was close, but the hearing was granted. Peter stepped forward to the speaking platform. Scar and Boulder moved with him, perfectly synchronized. The crowd gasped. 3 months ago, you sent me to die, Peter began. His voice was calm, measured. You called Dagran 7 a graveyard world. You said nothing could survive there except monsters. You were wrong on every count. He activated a holographic display, showing footage he had recorded on a salvage device. Images of the Prism Tooth pack hunting together, the coordinated movements, the clear communication. Videos of the Cubs playing, learning, caring for each other. Recordings of Wing and other species coexisting in complex territorial arrangements. These creatures aren't monsters. They're intelligent beings with social structures, emotional bonds, and problem-solving abilities. Previous expeditions failed because they treated Dagran 7 as an enemy to conquer. I treated it as a home to understand. A representative from the Shark species, a predator race themselves, stood abruptly. You expect us to believe you tamed Death World apex predators? This is clearly staged. Those creatures are sedated or controlled by technology. Peter smiled. Ambassador Quillen, could you verify that Scar and Boulder are wearing no control devices? Just harnesses for their comfort during space travel. Quillen confirmed it with scanner readings displayed for all to see. No implants, no neural controls, no sedatives in their systems. Then explain this. The Sharks representative hissed, approaching the platform aggressively. Scar moved instantly, placing herself between the Sharks and Peter. She didn't attack, didn't even growl. She simply stood there, a living barrier protecting her pack member. Boulder moved to flank position. Wing spread her wings above, casting a shadow. Peter placed a hand on Scar's shoulder. Friend, he said calmly, gesturing to the Sharks. Scar relaxed slightly, but maintained her position until Peter gave the command to return to his side. The assembly was silent. The Sharks representative slowly sat down. Pack behavior, Peter continued. They protect those they consider family. I didn't tame them. I joined them. There's a difference. Taming implies dominance and control. I offered respect and partnership. He brought up his research journals on the holographic display. I've documented 17 species of apex predators on Dagran 7. All of them show complex behaviors. All of them can be approached safely if you understand their communication and respect their territories. The previous expeditions failed because they set up camps on breeding grounds, used electromagnetic equipment that the creatures interpreted as threats, and responded to investigation with violence. Ambassador Quillen added her testimony. I've reviewed Dr. Walsh's documentation personally. The scientific rigor is exceptional. His behavioral observations alone would revolutionize our understanding of Death World ecosystems. But there's more, Peter said. He brought out his cookbook and food samples. Daegrin, 7 isn't just survivable. It's abundant. I've cataloged over 50 edible species of plants, fungi, and animals. Many contain compounds we've never seen before. Medical applications, nutritional value, unique flavors that could open new trade possibilities. He distributed samples he had prepared aboard the ship during the journey. Representatives tried the food cautiously, then with increasing enthusiasm. The flavors were unlike anything in galactic cuisine. An elderly representative from the architects, one of the oldest species in the collective, stood slowly. The chamber quieted immediately. Architects rarely spoke, but when they did, everyone listened. In 3 centuries of service, I have never witnessed what I see today, the architect said, her voice like wind through stone. A being from one world speaking for creatures of another with such conviction. A human who made a family across evolution itself. This is not conquest. This is not control. This is understanding. She looked at Peter, then at the pack. The question before us is not whether Dr. Walsh violated protocols. He did. The question is whether those protocols serve us anymore. We have classified entire worlds as worthless because they challenged us. Perhaps the failure was ours, not theirs. The architect turned to the assembly. I vote for full exoneration of Peter Walsh and redesignation of Daegrin, 7 as a protected ecosystem under human-led conservation. Furthermore, I propose Dr. Walsh be appointed as our first interspecies relations specialist to teach us what we have forgotten, that every world deserves understanding before judgment. The debate that followed lasted hours. Some argued for caution. Others pointed to the clear evidence. The Prism-Tooths remained calm throughout, occasionally receiving treats from Peter, proving over and over that they were in full control of themselves. Finally, the vote came. It passed by a narrow margin. Daegrin, 7 was no longer a graveyard world. Peter was cleared of all charges. And most importantly, his pack was recognized as protected beings under collective law. 6 months later, Peter returned to Daegrin, 7, this time leading a mixed team of humans and aliens. The approach was different now. Respect instead of fear. Patience instead of aggression. Understanding instead of conquest. A young human researcher watched in awe as Peter walked among the Prism-Tooths, checking on Scar's pack, greeting old friends. "How did you know it would work?" she asked. Peter scratched Scar behind her jaw ridge, the spot she loved. The massive predator rumbled with contentment. "Because I didn't try to change them. I just tried to understand them. Every creature in the universe wants the same things. Safety, food, family. Doesn't matter if you're human or a 4-ton predator. We all speak the same language when we bother to listen." Wings circled overhead, her healed wings strong and sure. The cubs, now nearly full-grown, taught the new researchers proper approach techniques. Boulder stood guard as always, patient and proud. Peter opened a new journal and began writing. The title page read simply, "The Galaxy's Garden, a Human's Guide to Making Friends Anywhere." Death worlds, he had learned, were only deadly to those who didn't respect them. Everywhere else was just home waiting to be discovered.